The first time my own daughter-in-law told me to leave the house I helped pay for, it wasn't shouted. It was whispered, soft and precise, like she was trimming something unnecessary from her life. "Marilyn, you need to start thinking about other arrangements." I remember the clock on the wall ticking too loudly. I remember the smell of burnt coffee. I remember how my hands, folded in my lap, suddenly felt like they didn't belong to me anymore. I was 68 years old. My name is Marilyn Cole, and for most of my adult life, I believed sacrifice was the purest form of love. I raised my son Andrew alone after his father disappeared, before Andrew could spell his own last name. I worked 2 jobs in Dayton, Ohio, one at a medical supply warehouse during the day, another cleaning offices at night. I missed school plays, I missed birthdays, I missed sleep. What I never missed was rent, groceries, or the quiet promise I made to myself every night driving home, exhausted. He will never feel the fear I felt. When Andrew married Claire, I told myself the hard years were finally behind me. She was polished, educated, quick with compliments when other people were around. She called me Mom in public and Marilyn in private. I didn't mind. I told myself it was modern. I told myself it was fine. When they asked me to move in temporarily after Andrew's startup struggled, I sold my small condo and gave them most of the proceeds. Not as a loan, as family. We were building something together, they said. That was 4 years ago. The house was large, new, and carefully staged. Gray walls, white marble counters. A place that never quite felt warm, no matter how high the heat was set. I took the guest room upstairs, paid monthly toward utilities, groceries, property tax. I cooked. I watched their kids when they eventually came. I made myself small. Until the afternoon, Claire sat across from me at the kitchen island, tapping her manicured nails against a leather folder. "We've been talking," she said, "and it's just not working anymore." Andrew stood behind her, silent, eyes fixed on his phone. She slid the folder toward me. Inside was a brochure. A luxury retirement community in Arizona. Palm trees. Couples my age smiling too hard. "You should use your savings," she continued. "This is a good opportunity for you to start over." Start over. At 68. With what savings? I asked quietly. Her eyes flicked up. Sharp. Calculating. "Well," she said, "you don't really need to keep all that money. You don't have dependents anymore." That was when something inside me cracked. Not loudly. Not all at once. Just enough to let the truth seep in. I looked at Andrew. My son. The boy whose lunches I packed with handwritten notes. The man whose wedding I paid for when his credit couldn't carry it. He didn't meet my eyes. "We'll help you pack," he said finally. "It's probably best." Best for who? That night, I lay awake listening to the house settle. I thought about every dollar I had given. Every excuse I had made for their sharp words, their impatience, their subtle rewrites of history, where my help became obligation and my presence became burden. I didn't cry, I planned. By morning, I knew 2 things with absolute clarity. First, they believed I was finished. Second, they had no idea who I was becoming, and that was their mistake. At the bottom of my suitcase, beneath folded sweaters and old photographs, was something they'd forgotten about entirely. A file. Names, dates, documents, proof. I closed the zipper quietly. Downstairs, Claire laughed at something on her phone. Andrew poured coffee. Neither of them noticed me standing there, watching, memorizing. They thought this was the end of my story. It was only the beginning. I didn't leave the house that day. Not because I couldn't, but because I needed them to believe I was broken. There is power in being underestimated, especially when people are already eager to write you off. Claire spent the morning on calls, her voice light and professional, as if she hadn't just told her husband's mother she was disposable. Andrew left for work without saying goodbye. The front door clicked shut, final and familiar. I sat alone at the kitchen table and opened the file. Inside were copies of bank transfers, loan agreements they'd asked me to co-sign, emails printed carefully over the years, messages where Andrew promised repayment, where Claire thanked me for saving us, where my money moved quietly into their company, their renovations, their lifestyle. They thought I was careless. I was thorough. The truth is, before Andrew was born, I worked briefly as an administrative assistant at a small law firm. I learned early how paper tells stories people forget they ever wrote. I learned how memory fades, but ink doesn't. That afternoon, I drove my old sedan to a motel just outside town. I paid cash for a week. The room smelled like bleach and regret, but it had a door that locked and silence that belonged to me. I made 2 appointments. The first was with a lawyer named Rebecca Lyons, late 50s, calm eyes, no pity in her voice. The second was with a financial forensic accountant. I slept better that night than I had in years. 3 days later, Claire called. Her tone was different, tight. "There's an issue," she said, "with some paperwork. Andrew says you might have copies." I smiled into the phone. "I might," I said. "Why?" Silence. "We'll talk when you're ready," she replied, and hung up. I was ready. Just not yet. Because revenge isn't loud. It isn't fast. And it certainly isn't sloppy. It's patient. And I had waited my whole life for something worth waiting for. The lawyer's office smelled faintly of lemon polish and old paper. Not the sterile kind of clean that makes you nervous, but the lived-in kind. The kind that suggested long battles fought quietly and won without applause. Rebecca Lyons didn't rush me. She read every document slowly, occasionally making a small mark in the margin with a pencil. No raised eyebrows, no sharp inhales, just attention. When she finally looked up, her expression was measured, but her eyes had changed. "Marilyn," she said, "your son and his wife didn't just misuse your trust. They structured it." That word landed heavier than I expected. Structured. "They moved your money in ways that imply expectation of return," she continued. "Which means this wasn't a gift, not legally, and in several cases, not ethically either." I folded my hands to keep them from shaking. "So I'm not imagining it." "No," she said gently. "You're finally seeing it." She explained things in clear, unromantic language. Undue influence, financial manipulation, implied contracts. The kind of phrases that don't mean much until they're attached to your own life. "What about the house?" I asked. "My name was never on the deed." Rebecca nodded. "But your money was used as leverage. We can establish equitable interest, especially given your age and living situation at the time." Age. Living situation. The words stung, but they were also weapons, tools. "Do you want to pursue this?" she asked. I thought about Claire's tone, about Andrew's eyes sliding away from mine, about being told to start over, like I was a worn-out appliance. "Yes," I said, "but not yet. I need time." She studied me, then smiled faintly. That's usually the right answer. Outside, the afternoon was gray and quiet. I sat in my car for a long time before turning the key, letting the weight of what I just learned settle into my bones. They thought I was dependent. In reality, they had built their lives on top of me. That evening, Andrew called. Not Claire. Him. "Mom," he said, voice low, almost rehearsed. "We need to clear the air." "Do we?" I asked. There was a pause. I could hear traffic in the background, the faint impatience in his breathing. "Claire's stressed," he said. "You know how she gets." She didn't mean it the way it sounded. I almost laughed. "Which part?" I asked. "The part where I was asked to leave? Or the part where my savings were discussed like community property?" "That's not fair," he snapped. "Neither is what you did," I replied calmly. Silence again. Longer this time. "We just need some help," he said finally. "Once things stabilize, we can talk about adjustments." Adjustments. I looked out the motel window at the flickering neon sign across the parking lot. "I've already helped," I said, "extensively." "Mom," he warned. "There it is," I said softly. That tone. "You don't even hear it anymore, do you?" He hung up without answering. 2 hours later, my phone buzzed again. A text from Claire. "We can do this the easy way or the hard way." I stared at the screen until it went dark. The easy way, for her, meant silence. The hard way meant consequences. I set the phone down and opened my notebook. I had started writing everything. Dates, conversations, who said what and when. It wasn't anger driving my pen. It was clarity. By the time I finished, I knew exactly what I was going to do. And I knew it would hurt them more than yelling ever could. Thanksgiving came early that year. Claire insisted on hosting, sending out group texts filled with curated warmth and carefully chosen exclamation points. She even invited me, as if the last month hadn't happened. Andrew followed up with a phone call. It would mean a lot, he said. For the kids. The kids. Always the shield. Always the excuse. I agreed to come. Rebecca had warned me not to confront them yet. Let them be comfortable, she'd said. People reveal more when they think they're safe. I arrived with a pie and a calm smile. The house looked exactly the same. Candles, music, the faint scent of roasted turkey. Claire greeted me like a politician greeting a donor, all air kisses and stiff affection. You look well, she said. I am, I replied truthfully. Dinner was a performance. Stories rewritten. Jokes at my expense disguised as nostalgia. Andrew laughed too loudly. Claire poured wine generously, her eyes sharp even as her smile stayed fixed. Halfway through the meal, Andrew cleared his throat. We've been talking, he said, glancing at Claire. About the future. I nodded, chewing slowly. We think it's time to make things official, Claire added. We're meeting with an estate planner next week. Estate planner. I set my fork down. That's wonderful, I said. I met with one recently too. Claire's smile faltered for just a second. Oh, she said. Planning ahead? Always, I replied. At my age, it's irresponsible not to. Andrew shifted in his chair. There's something else, he said. We were hoping you'd consider simplifying things. Streamlining accounts. It would make everything easier for everyone. There it was. The ask. Dressed up in concern. I've already simplified, I said. Claire leaned forward. We don't want things to get complicated later. Families fight over money. I met her gaze. Only when people feel entitled to what isn't theirs. The table went quiet. Andrew laughed nervously. Mom, come on. No, I said gently. You come on. You invited me here to soften me up, to remind me of what I stand to lose. Claire's face hardened. You're being dramatic. Am I? I asked. Because I've kept records, and lawyers, and conversations you might have forgotten. The color drained from Andrew's face. Claire stood abruptly. This is inappropriate. So was telling a woman in her late 60s to find somewhere else to live, I said evenly. The kids stared, confused. Claire grabbed her purse. We're done here, she said sharply. I stood too. Not yet, I replied. I just wanted you to know something. They both looked at me. You don't get to decide how this ends. I picked up my coat, kissed the kids goodbye, and walked out into the cold evening air. Behind me, the house buzzed with panic. Ahead of me, everything was finally quiet. And somewhere between the driveway and my car, I felt it. The shift. They were no longer in control, and they knew it. Control is a fragile thing. Once it cracks, people scramble to grab it back, often revealing more than they ever intended. The morning after Thanksgiving, my phone rang before 8. I didn't answer. By noon, there were 6 missed calls from Andrew and 3 voicemails from Claire. I listened to none of them. Instead, I sat at the small desk in my motel room with a cup of weak coffee and a yellow legal pad, reviewing notes from my meeting with the forensic accountant. His name was Michael Torres. Early 60s, careful voice. The kind of man who treated numbers like witnesses. Your money didn't just disappear, he'd said. It was layered. Layered. Transfers from my account into theirs. From theirs into Andrew's company. From the company into personal expenses disguised as reimbursements. Renovations. Travel. Credit card debt quietly cleared. They hadn't just taken from me. They had built their sense of safety on the assumption that I would never look closely. Michael had also found something else. A second account. One my name was still attached to, but which I hadn't accessed in years. Andrew had suggested it during the condo sale, framing it as a convenience, a temporary holding account. It wasn't temporary. Do they still have access? I'd asked. Michael nodded. As of last month, I closed my eyes. That explained the sudden confidence, the urgency, the entitlement. They weren't asking. They were calculating. That afternoon, Rebecca filed the first notice, a formal request for documentation. Quiet, procedural, the kind of thing that didn't look like an attack until it was far too late. That evening, Claire showed up at the motel. I recognized her car immediately. Parked crooked, engine still running. She knocked like she owned the door. Open up, she called. We need to talk. I waited a full minute before unlocking it. She stepped inside without invitation, eyes scanning the room with thinly veiled disdain. "This is where you've been hiding?" she asked. "Hiding implies shame," I said. "I'm resting," she scoffed. "You're making things very difficult. I wasn't aware things were supposed to be easy for you," I replied. She crossed her arms. "Andrew is under a lot of pressure. You dragging lawyers into this could destroy him." I met her gaze. "You did that all on your own." Her jaw tightened. "You don't understand how businesses work." "I understand debt," I said calmly. "I understand leverage. And I understand manipulation." Her eyes flashed. "Careful, or what?" I asked. "You'll ask me to leave again?" She stepped closer. Too close. "You think you're being clever," she hissed. "But you're alone. You don't have the stamina for this." I smiled. "You confuse quiet with weak," I said. "That's a common mistake." She froze. Behind her anger, I saw it then. Fear. Not of me, but of exposure. She turned sharply and left without another word. That night, I slept deeply. The next morning, Rebecca called. "They've retained counsel," she said. "An aggressive one." I felt no panic. "Good," I replied. "That means they're scared." December arrived with cold clarity. Andrew stopped calling altogether. Claire switched tactics. Emails, carefully worded, copied to their lawyer. Offers of mediation. Subtle threats wrapped in politeness. Rebecca responded to none of them directly. Instead, she filed a claim of financial exploitation, a request for account freezes, a notice asserting equitable interest in the property. The effect was immediate. Their second account was locked within 48 hours. Credit cards declined. Automatic payments bounced. Andrew's company payroll stalled. That was when Andrew finally showed up. Not at the motel, at Rebecca's office. I wasn't expecting him, but when I walked into the conference room and saw him sitting there, shoulders slumped, something twisted in my chest. He looked older, smaller. "Mom?" he said quietly. I sat across from him. Rebecca stayed. So did his lawyer. The room felt heavy with unspoken history. "I didn't know it went this far," Andrew said. "Claire handled most of the finances." "That's not true," I replied. "You signed everything." He swallowed. "I trusted her." "So did I said. "Once." His lawyer cleared his throat. "We're here to discuss resolution." Andrew looked at me. "We can fix this. We'll pay you back, over time." Rebecca leaned forward. "Based on the evidence, repayment is not optional. It's owed." Andrew flinched. "I'm asking you," he said to me, voice cracking. "Please, don't do this." The room went very still. I thought about the nights I stayed up sewing patches onto his jackets. The way he used to call me when he was scared, even as an adult. The way he had stood silent while his wife erased me. "This isn't me doing something to you," I said softly. "This is me stopping you from doing it to me again." Tears welled in his eyes. "I'm sorry," he whispered. It wasn't the apology I needed. Rebecca slid a document across the table. "These are the terms." Andrew scanned them, hands shaking. "Repayment, interest, sale of the house if necessary, a formal acknowledgement of financial misconduct." "And the will?" his lawyer asked. I met Andrew's gaze. "I've updated it," I said. "You're no longer a beneficiary." The words landed like a physical blow. "You're cutting me out?" he asked. "I'm protecting myself," I replied. "There's a difference." He looked down, defeated. When the meeting ended, Andrew didn't follow me out. Outside, the air was sharp and clean. I stood on the sidewalk for a moment, breathing deeply. This was the escalation, the point of no return. And somewhere inside the ache, beneath the grief and the old habits of guilt, something steady took root. Relief. Because for the first time in my life, I wasn't choosing peace at my own expense. I was choosing myself, and the storm had only just begun. By January, the town knew. Not the details, not the numbers, but the shape of it. Whispers move faster than truth in places like Dayton. People noticed when Andrew's company missed payroll. They noticed when Claire stopped hosting. They noticed the house, once lit every evening, sitting dark for days at a time. I noticed the quiet. For the first time in years, no one was asking me for anything. Rebecca advised me to stay visible, but neutral. Let the process do the talking, she said. People tend to reveal themselves when the pressure stays on. She was right. Claire began calling again, late at night, early morning. Once from a number I didn't recognize. I answered exactly one time. "You're enjoying this," she said, skipping pleasantries, watching us struggle. "I'm enjoying honesty," I replied, for once. "You're ruining your own son," she snapped. "No," I said evenly. I stopped rescuing him. Silence crackled on the line. "You think you're some kind of martyr," she continued. "But when this is over, you'll still be alone." That word again. Alone. I looked around my small apartment, the one I'd moved into after leaving the motel. Sunlight through clean windows. My things arranged exactly how I liked them. No tension humming under the surface. "I am alone," I said. "And I've never felt more whole." She hung up. 2 days later, Rebecca called with an update. "They're liquidating assets," she said. "The house will go on the market." I felt it then. Not triumph, not joy. Closure. The house I'd helped pay for. The rooms where I'd made myself invisible. Soon, it would belong to no one I knew. That night, I dreamed of my old condo. The one I'd sold too quickly, too generously. In the dream, I walked through it without asking permission. When I woke up, I knew what I needed to do next. I booked a flight, not to visit friends, not to escape, to attend a conference for women over 50 re-entering the workforce. The idea would have terrified me once. Now, it felt inevitable. On the plane, I sat next to a woman my age, reading a legal thriller. We chatted. She asked what I did. "I'm rebuilding," I said. She smiled. "Aren't we all?" By the time we landed, my phone buzzed with a text from Andrew. "Mom, please, can we talk?" I stared at the message for a long time. Then I turned the phone off. The conference hotel buzzed with energy I hadn't felt in decades. Women everywhere. Confident, nervous, curious. Some dressed like they were still proving something. Others like they were done apologizing. I attended panels on consulting, mentorship, late career pivots. I listened more than I spoke. I took notes like my future depended on it, because it did. On the second day, during a breakout session on ethics and leadership, I told my story. Not all of it, just enough. I spoke about sacrifice mistaken for obligation, about silence mistaken for consent, about the cost of staying comfortable in places that slowly erase you. When I finished, the room was quiet, then applause. Not loud, not dramatic, respectful. Afterward, women came up to me, asked questions, shared their own versions of betrayal. Workplace, family, both. One woman, a former human resources director named Elaine, lingered. "You ever consider consulting?" she asked. "For what?" I replied. She smiled. "For companies that don't realize how much they're losing by overlooking experience." It felt like a door opening. Back home, the legal process continued without me hovering over it. Rebecca handled filings, Michael tracked funds. I focused on something new. Building a life that wasn't defined by reaction. Andrew sent more messages. Apologies, explanations, promises. I read none of them. Claire sent one final email. "You've made your point. I hope it was worth it." I deleted it without replying. 2 weeks later, Rebecca called. "It's done," she said. "Settlement reached. Full repayment schedule. House sold. Accounts restructured." I sat down slowly. "And Andrew?" I asked. She paused. "He signed everything." I closed my eyes. That night, I cooked myself dinner. Simple, quiet, nourishing. I raised a glass of water to no one. This wasn't revenge the way movies sell it. There was no cheering crowd, no dramatic collapse. There was accountability and peace. But karma, I was learning, doesn't always strike once. Sometimes it circles back. And when it does, it chooses its moment carefully, just like I had. The house sold in early February, during one of those bitter Midwestern cold snaps that makes everything feel sharper than it should. Rebecca forwarded me the notice while I was standing in line at the grocery store, debating between 2 brands of soup. Seeing the address typed out like a completed sentence did something strange to me. For years, that house had felt like a debt I carried in my chest. Now, it was just an entry on a document. resolved and finished. I didn't celebrate. Instead, I went home and opened the old cedar box I've been carrying from place to place since my 20s. Inside were things I'd never thrown away, but never really touched either. Andrew's kindergarten drawings, pay stubs from jobs I'd forgotten the names of, a folded letter from my own mother, written shortly before she died, reminding me to never confuse love with endurance. I sat on the floor and cried. Not loudly, not dramatically, honestly. Later that week, Andrew called from a new number. I recognized his voice immediately. "Mom," he said, "I'm not asking for anything." That was new. "I just wanted you to hear it from me." Claire moved out. I leaned back against the counter, phone pressed to my ear. "When?" I asked. "Last night," he said. "She took what she could. Says she's staying with a friend in Chicago." I felt a familiar instinct rise in me. Concern. The urge to fix. I let it pass. "I'm sorry," he continued. "I should have protected you. I didn't." There it was. Not a justification, not a deflection. A truth. "I know," I said quietly. Silence stretched between us. I could hear his breathing, uneven, like he was bracing for impact. "I don't expect forgiveness," he said. "I just wanted you to know I'm trying to take responsibility." I closed my eyes. "You should," I replied. "For yourself, not for me." After we hung up, I sat there for a long time. The ache was still there, but it no longer felt like an open wound, more like scar tissue. Sensitive, but healed enough to touch. That afternoon, I received an email from Elaine. She wanted to introduce me to a company in Columbus. Mid-sized, family-owned, quietly bleeding talent because leadership couldn't understand why morale kept collapsing. "They don't need a consultant," she wrote. "They need someone who understands consequences." I smiled at that. The meeting was set for the following week. That night, I stood at my apartment window, watching snow drift down in slow, deliberate sheets. I realized something that startled me with its simplicity. If none of this had happened, I would still be shrinking, still apologizing, still mistaking silence for peace. The betrayal had hurt. Deeply. But it had also broken a pattern I didn't know how to escape on my own. And that realization came with a quiet kind of gratitude I wasn't ready to name yet. The conference room in Columbus was all glass and polished wood. The kind of place designed to feel transparent while hiding everything that mattered. There were 5 of them, 3 men, 2 women, all younger than me by at least a decade. They greeted me politely, but I could see the skepticism flicker behind their eyes. I was used to that look now. They expected theory, jargon, something abstract. I gave them a story instead. I talked about loyalty without accountability, about what happens when leadership treats people like resources instead of humans, about how exploitation doesn't always shout. Sometimes it smiles and says thank you, while quietly draining everything beneath it. One of the men shifted uncomfortably. A woman across the table leaned forward. "How do you fix that?" she asked. "You don't," I said. "You replace it. With boundaries, with consequences, with systems that don't rely on one person being endlessly generous." The room went quiet. Afterward, the CEO walked me to the elevator. "You remind me of my mother," he said. "In a good way." I laughed softly. "Then listen to me the way you wish you had listened to her." 2 days later, they offered me a 6-month contract. I accepted. Andrew texted that night. "I got an apartment. Smaller, cheaper. I'm starting over." I stared at the message, then typed back, "That's good. Take it slow." It wasn't reconciliation. It wasn't absolution. It was distance with dignity. Claire, I heard through a mutual acquaintance, was telling anyone who would listen that I had ruined her life, that I was cold, vindictive, heartless. I didn't correct the story. People who needed to believe that were never going to see me clearly anyway. On a quiet Sunday morning, I drove past the old neighborhood. The house looked different without their cars in the driveway. Empty. Ordinary. I didn't stop. At a red light, my phone buzzed with a notification. "Elaine again. Lunch next week? I have another opportunity I think you'll like." I smiled. Later, as I sat at my kitchen table reviewing notes from my first consulting session, I thought about how strange it was that revenge hadn't looked the way I expected. There was no grand speech, no collapse broadcast to the world, just truth, applied steadily, just consequences, allowed to unfold. Just a woman in her late 60s who finally stopped negotiating her worth. If you're still listening to this story, maybe you recognize something in it. Maybe you've been told to be patient, to keep the peace, to sacrifice quietly and call it love. I did that for decades, and all it ever taught the wrong people was how much they could take. What changed my life wasn't anger, it was clarity. And that clarity gave me something better than revenge. It gave me a future. If you want to hear how this story ends, if you believe in karma that works slowly but surely, stay with me. Like this story, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe, because some endings don't arrive with noise. They arrive with choice. Success has a way of changing the temperature of a room. By early spring, my consulting calendar was full. Word traveled quietly, the way it always does among people who've learned the hard way. I wasn't flashy. I didn't sell miracles. I listened, observed, and then asked the questions no one else wanted to answer. Why do your best employees leave? Quietly. Who benefits when policies stay vague? What happens when loyalty is rewarded with silence? In Columbus, the changes started small. Clear reporting lines, written protections, exit interviews that weren't treated like formalities. Within 2 months, turnover slowed. By the 4th, morale surveys shifted in ways the board couldn't ignore. They extended my contract. Money came in steadily. Not extravagantly, but enough that I no longer checked my balance before buying groceries. Enough that my body began to relax in ways I hadn't realized it was clenched. That was when Andrew asked to meet. He suggested a diner halfway between our apartments. Neutral ground, familiar enough to feel safe. I arrived early and took a booth by the window. When he walked in, I barely recognized him. He'd lost weight. His shoulders curved inward like he was bracing against something invisible. When he saw me, he hesitated, then smiled the way he used to when he was nervous as a boy. "Hi, Mom." "Hi, Andrew." We ordered coffee, black for both of us. Some habits don't change. "I'm not here to ask for forgiveness," he said quickly. "I know that's not how this works." I nodded. "I started therapy," he continued. "I'm learning some things about myself that aren't easy to hear." I waited. "I let Claire control everything because it meant I didn't have to," he said. "Including standing up to her. Including standing up for you." There was no self-pity in his voice this time, just exhaustion. "I don't expect us to go back to how things were," he said. "I just want to know if there's any way forward." I studied his face, the familiar lines, the echoes of the child I raised, layered over the man he'd become. "There is," I said finally, "but it won't look like before." He swallowed. "I understand." "Good," I replied, because before nearly destroyed me. We talked for an hour, about boundaries, about money that would never change hands again, about conversations that would stop the moment respect disappeared. When we stood to leave, he hugged me carefully, like someone handling something fragile. For the first time, I didn't feel the urge to carry him. I felt the choice to walk beside him. That evening, back in my apartment, I opened my laptop and updated my will again. Not to punish, not to reward, to reflect reality. Some relationships, when stripped of obligation, can be rebuilt slowly. Others exist only as lessons. I slept well that night. Outside, spring rain tapped softly against the windows. Inside, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Grounded. By the time summer arrived, my life looked nothing like the one I'd been told was ending. I moved into a townhouse near a small park. Nothing extravagant, just light, quiet, and a sense of ownership that had nothing to do with deeds or paperwork. I planted herbs on the back patio. I walked every morning. I cooked meals that didn't need to impress anyone. Andrew and I spoke occasionally, carefully, with intention. Some days were easier than others. Healing, I learned, doesn't move in straight lines. Claire filed for divorce in June. I heard about it from Andrew, not gossip. He didn't ask me to comment. I didn't offer. Her story, as far as I was concerned, was no longer mine to carry. The final repayment installment arrived in late August. Rebecca called to confirm. "That's it," she said. "All obligations fulfilled." I thanked her and hung up, then sat quietly for a long time. There was no rush of triumph, no victory speech echoing in my head, just stillness. I realized then that revenge had never been the point. What I had wanted all along was recognition of my humanity, of my limits, of my right to say no without being punished for it. Karma didn't come crashing through the door. It arrived in smaller ways, in the house that had to be sold, in the marriage that collapsed under the weight of its own manipulation, in the son who had to finally stand alone and decide who he wanted to be without using me as a shield. And in me, the woman who stopped negotiating her worth. On my 70th birthday, I hosted a small dinner. A few friends from work, 2 women from the conference who had become something like chosen family. Andrew came, briefly, respectfully. We laughed, we ate. We talked about books and travel and plans that didn't revolve around survival. At one point, someone asked me if I regretted how things turned out. I thought about it carefully. No, I said. I regret how long I stayed silent. Later that night, after everyone left, I stood on the patio and listened to the cicadas hum in the dark. The air was warm. The world felt wide again. I wasn't erased. I wasn't bitter. I wasn't broken. I was awake. If you've stayed with me this far, maybe part of this story felt uncomfortably familiar. Maybe you've given too much to people who learned to expect it. Maybe you've been told that setting boundaries makes you cruel, unloving, or selfish. It doesn't. It makes you free. If this story resonated with you, take a moment to like it, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe. Because stories like this aren't about revenge alone. They're about remembering who you are and choosing yourself, no matter how late you think it might be.